Okay, thanks very much to invite me to make this presentation. So this presentation hopefully will brought your interest since it is a case study on my country. So actually, France is planning to revise entirely its way to finance psychiatry. In that context, I was asked by La Cour des Comptes, which is our highest authority who check all money concerning the country, to make a report about access to care for psychiatry. And I would like to share with you the method and the results to evaluate the provision of mental health care in the country as a whole. So here you can see the spending on psychiatry, mental health care as percentage of GDP as calculated by OCDE. And as you see, France, and I think I can use that. Okay. So France is, as you can see, more or less at average for UA and even a bit higher. So the problem is not so much how much money we are putting into the system. If we want to compare France with other countries in terms of general practitioner, psychiatrist, clinical psychology on psychiatric beds, or even a sort of index of mental health care provision, as you can see, as compared to many other European countries, you see that France is quite high. Certainly in terms of the rate of psychiatrists, I think the clinical psychologist, it depends, it's very difficult to calculate it. And in terms of psychiatric beds, we certainly are lower than some of the country, but we are not so low. So what I would like to show you is what we have done to give advice about the financing reform. The methodology was that I will present to you was some site visits plus an exploitation nationwide, exhaustive, public as well as private, of all hospitalization for the year 2018, plus all the acts that has been done in outpatient care, except that one of the psychiatrists who are working in a liberal way. And then I will add some result of survey to be able to compare the country and a national survey on psychotherapy, and you will see why. So that's the key figure for 2070 and 2090 were not so different. To give you an idea about the global picture in France. So as you say, we have 420,000 patients hospitalized. And as you can see, we have two types of hospitalization, what we call public, and in fact is public and private non-profit. And then you have the private that we call for-profit. So as you can see in France, the proportion of psychiatry structure in private profit are nearly 23%. And in terms of the number of nights, we are talking about million. You see that 5 million of nights have been spent in private structure. And if you go further down, you can see the ambulatory care, for whom we do not include the private psychiatrists. And we are talking about 21 million of ambulatory act and 2.1 million of people who are under care in that system. So what I will present to you is a way to deal with this data. And as you will see, the way I was managing data was trying to build some case mix and to try to find out to whom the resources are directed to. And I think I saw that it will be interesting to share with you that method because it's quite rare to try to vision to what sort of patient the resources are going to. So this is a relatively old publication, but it's just an illustration. It's a general population survey in 6 different European countries with the same methodology. You may have heard about WMH and SMH, which is the European part of it. And just what I want to illustrate is that France is is only one country where the psychiatrist usage is higher than the psychologist. And I see, for example, the large contrast with the Netherlands, for example, and you know the different color correspond to people who have, to whom people are directed when they have the most common disorder. And you see, for example, that in the Netherlands, it is a total contrast. That means that nearly, of course, in each country, the GP is the first resource, but then in the Netherlands, for example, a high percentage will be treated by people who are not psychiatrists, where they are in France, psychiatrists is a very important role. That's a survey that we have done in far French region with very different resource level. Ile-de-France, as you can imagine, which is a Parisian area, is very well staffed, whether Haute-Normandy or Lorraine. Lorraine is the east part of the country, and Haute-Normandy is the northern west part. They have much less resource. And so in France, at that time, 7% report we've done is psychotherapy lifetime, and half of those psychotherapy were done by psychiatrists. And one of the major problems in my country is that psychiatrists are reimbursed by the national insurance, whether psychologists are not. So people who are doing half of the psychotherapy are done by psychiatrists, mainly because they get reimbursed. And we are talking about the liberal psychiatrists. So of course that has an influence about the usage of psychiatrists, because as you may remember in my first slide, we have a very high density of psychiatrists. As true, they are not well balanced in the country. Some places are lacking psychiatrists, whereas some other, like the Parisian area, are very well staffed. But at any rate, it's twist the access to psychiatry. And what I am showing to you here is on 21 million of acts that has been done in the year 2018, the different diagnoses according to the different age. So here you have for the young people, if you have the adult, if you have the age, and the color correspond to the different ICD-9 classification. You don't need to really read the whole stuff because, you know, I fully agree that it is hard to see. But what I would like just to see, to show to you is that what you have here in blue are the person to whom we do not even have a diagnosis. Most of the time it is a symptom, or a symptom like overburden at work, or some stress. And then you have quite a few anxious disorder, which is that light blue, and probably some of the depressive disorder. So what we are calculating is that probably a third of acts that were done in the ambulatory care, in the psychiatrist, public and non-private system are directed to mild or moderate disorder. And then when you look in detail on what happened to this patient, you see that what is relatively obvious is that most of them, they are not taken care by the medical provider like the psychiatrist, but you know, most of them will be taken in care by a nurse or by a psychologist, and of course this depends on the disorder. So in fact, we are using our highly specialized system to be in sort of parallel with what the primary care system could eventually do, and what is the situation in many other European countries. So, there are consequences, because the consequences are, when you look at the Outpatient Act for adults, for example, we have very few home visits. You know, for example, you take all the act, which is 21 million, which is a lot of resource. You have less than 5% of the patient who will benefit for a home visit. Half of those few are for psychotic patients, and half of the activity are done at the outpatient sites, or they are in outpatient consultation located in hospital, or they are at the emergency room. So you see that the way the system is functioning is that the model is people are coming to the outpatient center, and we are not outreaching the patient. And as you will see, we are not outreaching the more severe patient. So there are consequences, as you can imagine, on hospitalization and discharge follow-up. For example, into the same year, and there are extensive data, including private and non-profit hospital, you can see that, you know, nearly 10% of the patient will be hospitalized for months at 6 months. And if you take the number of nights, it's huge. That means a third of the night will be done because for patients who are staying more than 1 year, and an additional 12%. So it means that nearly half of the night spent in acute psychiatric hospital are done for patients. And I think we agreed that, you know, in psychiatry, to be hospitalized for more than 6 months is probably not adequate for the patient. And of course, half of the long day concern psychotic patient. So rehospitalization are very high. As you can see on the top, you know, 40% will be hospitalized the same year, re-hospitalized the same year. And not only you have one hospital, we were following the patient for the exact same year. So that means when they were hospitalized in starting January 2018 and re-hospitalized the same year, which means quite short time re-hospitalization. And, you know, even for 2 re-hospitalization in the year, you know, for psychotic patient, you have 22%, nearly 23, one re-hospitalization and 21 a re-hospitalization too. And then, of course, there is a very high involuntary admission. And again, it is mainly toward psychosis patients. And then when you look the way people are getting into hospitalization, since, as I say, we are doing so few home visits, most of them will arrive either from emergency room or what it is including from home.
Viviane, I think we cannot hear you anymore. Elena, can you confirm?
Yeah,
yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, we hear you again. You can continue, Viviane.
Okay, so as I say, most of the patient will enter into the system through emergency room, which can view as a sort of consequence of a lack of following up patient at their place. So you see that not only they are coming at emergency room, but some of them are coded from home, but in fact it's because they come from an emergency room from another hospital that have been transferred. So, you know, it means that probably quite a good deal of the patient will come either from another short-term stay or emergency room. An interesting comparison has been done by one of our colleagues in Belgium, which tried to compare the different systems. Some of them, what you call market regulate, and some of them who has been nationalized, and you have their flag, so you know which countries they are. And then he tried to find out what's the percentage of the patient who didn't have any follow-up in the psychiatric system after 2 months discharge. And I think it is an interesting indicator to compare the follow-up of the patient. And you see that in the case of France, we find out that 26% of the patients do not have any psychiatric follow-up during 2 months. And for this statistic, we were able to include the private psychiatrists. So it means that our system is performing very badly in terms of follow-up. And if you look, no follow-up during the year of discharge, we still are close to 20%. So the final picture to summarize is that we are spending a lot of resources. I mean, everybody speaking about psychiatric resources in France is always considering that we are putting too few resources into the psychiatric system. But as a matter of fact, and La Cour des Comptes, which is a financial authority, is not believing that we are spending so few resources into the psychiatric system. The problem is not there. The problem is that a lot of resource is directed toward patients suffering from mild and moderate disorder, and those patients have to be treated in primary care. And of course, and I will terminate my presentation on that, the primary care should be supported by psychologists and psychiatrists whenever needed. At the other hand, there are too few patients, there are quite a few patients hospitalized for too long duration, frequently re-hospitalized because there is no home visit, no reaching out. And a trend is now to develop crisis intervention totally independently on the psychiatric care. So a lot of patients arrive at emergency room, and in addition to that, we do not have enough supervised housing. So what we were proposing is the model, which is a stepwise approach. That is that you go from the general to the specialized and highly specialized care, and you go from the mild to the severe disorder. And you know what I have put into, doesn't matter, it is in French, but because the name are in French, but you know what, I think you got the idea, which is in primary care, you have the psychological distress and anxious and depressive, mild and moderate, and then you have the psychiatrist, and then you have the hospitalization, and eventually specialized hospitalization. And then we were proposing some solution. So some solution is that it's very important, in our opinion, that the administrative people who the authority who are financing the resource are aware about case mix. It's very amazing because, you know, when we told with administrative people, director, you know, the regional authority or even hospital authority, and we say, but why don't you look at the psychiatric diagnosis? But they say, you know, it's confidential data. I say, wait a minute, we are not talking about the diagnosis of Mr. John. We are talking about 21 million of ACT or 400,000 people. So, you know, we just want to know to whom, to what type of patient are going the resource. It's nothing confidential. And in addition, we strongly suggest to have a severity measure. So, you know, we can have an idea. Many of the European countries have severity measure like the gas or HONOS or things, any any type of severity measure to have an idea. So we insist on the need to follow up, the case mix by type of resource to really, for the regional authority to really carefully monitor what's doing, and so to include case mix indicator for the financing where they are controlling the hospital, and of course to follow up indicator and monitor them. And it's very important to consider public psychiatry as a specialized care, and of course to support the GP. And so what we were concretely proposing is that the public psychiatry will be gate-kept. That means, as for example, in England, when in order to reach a psychiatrist, you have to see a GP first, which happened for the private psychiatrists, but not at all for public psychiatry. And we are strongly supporting to extend an experimentation where psychologists are financed. Actually, the experiment, which in fact is following a British experience, has integrated actually 30,000 patients, 300,000 sessions. So we have quite a lot of experience about it. So the model is the following, is that, you know, is the GP, which is at the center, and when he has a suspicion of depressive anxious disorder, he will make a clinical evaluation, as the British did with PHQ and GAD. And then, you know, of course, there are some exclusion for the more severe patient, and there are some inclusion. And if he's included to the experimentation, then, you know, the patient will be proposed to have an evaluation session with a psychologist that will be paid by the national security, and then it could be followed by up to 20 sessions. And in the middle, after 10 sessions, if the patient is not better, there will be a call or a visit with a psychiatrist to ensure that it is not something too severe to be only treated by psychotherapy. Thanks for your attention.